Hi, Counselor Klassen. This is the clerk in the chamber. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can.
No, I saw it. Hi, Counselor Klassen. Just checking again. Are you able to hear the clerk okay?
Yes, I can. Can you hear me? Hi, can you hear me?
Perfect. We can see you okay there. Thank you.
But can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Sorry, Counselor Klassen. Your sound isn't coming through at the moment.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, that's perfect. Thank you.
Okay, thanks.
Amazing.
Good evening, everyone. As the clerk for this meeting, I will now call this meeting to order and proceed to roll call. Mayor Sim? Counselor Carr? Counselor Kirby-Young? Counselor Dominato is on a medical leave. Counselor Bly is on a leave of absence for personal reasons. Counselor Boyle is on a leave of absence for personal reasons. Counselor Fry?
Present.
Counselor Montague? Counselor Klassen?
Present.
Counselor Meisner? And Counselor Joe is on a leave of absence for personal reasons. This committee has quorum. Thank you, committee members. Vice Chair Klassen is joining us virtually this evening. He has requested to select a chair that is in the chamber and has recommended Counselor Fry. Counselor Fry, are you agreeable to chair for this meeting?
Thank you, Clerk. I am. All right. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Standing Committee meeting on City Finance and Services meeting of Thursday, December 12th, 2024, reconvening from yesterday, Wednesday, December 11th, 2024. This committee meeting is being convened in person and by electronic means as authorized under Part 14 of the Procedure Bylaw, City of Vancouver electronic meetings. As such, committee members and the public may participate in person or by electronic means. If a committee member attending by electronic means loses connection during the voting process, team members are available to get you back online quickly while the voting process is suspended. Contact information has been circulated to you. Committee members are reminded that in accordance with sections 14.13 of the Procedure Bylaw, and due to limited quorum, members should have their camera on at all times to confirm quorum. Video of committee members speaking, presentations, and vote results will be projected on the live stream when available. In the case of an emergency where we need to evacuate the building, I would like to direct your attention to the exits. There are 2 exits beyond the glass doors and to the left. If the glass doors are obstructed, please direct your attention to the 4 exits in this chamber. Please use the stairs, do not use the elevator. If you require accessibility assistance, please remain at your location and wait for a security team member to guide you to a safe location. I would like to also highlight that there is a defibrillator located at the end of the hallway outside the council chamber. We acknowledge that we are on the unceded homelands of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh people. We thank them for having cared for this land and look forward to working with them together in partnership as we continue to build this great city together. I also want to take a moment to recognize the immense contributions of the City of Vancouver's team members who work hard every day to help make our city an incredible place to live, work, and play. The clerk's already completed the roll call earlier, so I will now go through the plan for this evening. Any comments on agenda items can be sent to the committee using the web form on the city's website. The link to that form has been posted on X at Van City Clerk. I also want to note the City of Vancouver's longstanding commitment to equity, diversity, and inclusion, including the utmost respect for all genders. I remind the committee that when addressing speakers and the city's team members, we will avoid using gendered honorifics and will instead refer to the person by first and last name, role, or title. If the meeting does not finish today, we will reconvene on Monday, December 16th, 2024 at 3 p.m. Yesterday, we varied the agenda and moved Report 1, Broadway Plan Review and Implementation to the end. All other agenda items were completed. Before we continue to debate and decision for the Broadway Plan Review and Implementation Report, I will remind everyone that Council is committed to ensuring that all people who participate in Council meetings are treated fairly and respectfully. The language we all use in these meetings should reflect respect for all residents. No form of discrimination is acceptable or tolerated. Discriminatory language includes attacks on groups of people and individuals. Vancouver's procedure bylaws prohibit council members from the use of words, tone, manner of speaking or gestures that express a negative view on the character of any person or groups of people. Members of the public are welcome to observe council meetings and are expected to not engage in improper conduct, which includes the use of expressions that promote hatred or are defamatory as outlined under Section 7.8 of the procedure bylaw. The creation of safe and inclusive environments for the public, staff, and council to participate is all of our responsibility. Members of council may call a point of order if language used by another councillor during a meeting is not respectful. And as chair, I'm going to ask that speakers modify their language to ensure they are using respectful language. At yesterday's meeting, the committee received a presentation, asked questions to staff, and completed hearing from all available registered speakers for the Broadway Plan Review and Implementation Report. Before we continue, as a precaution for those that may not have been present at yesterday's meeting, if anyone believes that they have a conflict of interest, now is the time to declare it. Does anybody have a conflict they wish to disclose? Great. Seeing none, we will now continue from where we left off yesterday. Would somebody like to move a motion? And is there a seconder? Moved by Councillor Kirby-Young, seconded by Councillor Meisner. Committee members, is there any discussion? And I see councillors on the Creston queue, starting with Councillor Carr. Oh, okay. Councillor Kirby-Young.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I would like to propose an amendment, which I shared with Council yesterday and then an updated version today, and the clerk should have it. You want to move us to an amendment queue? Sure. Should I begin?
Yes, please. Oh, sorry. We'll put you on the amendment queue. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Before we get into sort of the broader conversation around the overall plan and the changes, there are a couple things that stood out for me in the conversation around some components, and specifically with respects to hotels. We do have an initiative underway with a hotel task force and a report that's coming back in the spring, Q2, likely April of next year, around better enabling hotels. But we are hearing of the challenges in delivering those economically. Just like rental housing is more difficult to deliver than strata, hotels are challenging the commercial space. And so we heard from a proponent, and I've heard from others. Yesterday we heard from one, I've heard from others, around how we could have more interesting hotels in different neighborhoods and in different spaces, because they typically don't need parking in the same way. A lot of folks are not traveling with cars now, they're arriving in different ways. And so those smaller frontages can actually make a real difference. And so the first one is a new clause to the report that Council directs staff to report back in conjunction with the upcoming report on citywide policy changes to incentivize hotel development in Q2 2025, with amendments that would provide flexibility in reducing the 99-foot site frontage requirement for hotel applications in non-residential areas, and considering any consequential amendments to the Broadway plan as appropriate. And so that is to enable some of those I think, projects and can take advantage of some of the available space and actually make them viable. So that's the first one. And then the other amendments are additions to recommendation E, and this is really around recognizing that we need to put the pedal to the metal around delivering on the public realm piece and the public benefit strategy in the Broadway plan to contribute to livability in the area. I know that's a big concern. It was something we discussed when we first passed the plan. And so this one has two components, and one is that as part of the work underway to implement amenity cost charges pursuant to Bill 46, Council directs staff to explore and report back on options to support the delivery of the Broadway Public Realm Plan and public space and amenities that contribute to neighborhood and area livability. So the spirit of that one is obviously to, as I said, put the pedal to the metal, but really get very clear around our ability to fund and deliver on that and prioritize those important amenities for the community. The second clause is that further that council directs staff to consider opportunities in key locations, such as major intersections or larger sites, utilizing the flexibility in the Broadway plan where increases in density could generate cash amenity charges that could be used to support public realm investments and area residents. And that council that directs staff to advise us in future of any explicit policy changes that would be that could be beneficial in future updates to the Broadway plan. And that's again in recognizing that, as we heard, 75% of the housing that's coming in so far in the inquiries is rental, and that doesn't necessarily generate those amenity charges. That helps us to pay for that. So looking to acknowledge that and recognize that there may be some sites where we can actually secure some funding to deliver on some of those benefits. So those are my proposed additions. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Councillor Kirby-Young. Seeing nobody on the queue, we can, thanks, Councillor Meisner. Seconded by Councillor Meisner. Seeing nobody on the queue, we can move right to a voting panel. Well articulated. Thank you, Councillor Kirby-Young. And that passes with none in opposition. Thank you, Councillor Kirby-Young. To the main queue. Great, Councillor Kirby-Young, are you on the main queue to speak?
That's good for now. Thanks.
Okay, Councillor Carr.
Sorry, I did submit some amendments, so you can move us to an amendment queue. The first set of amendments has really to do with tenant protection. And excuse me, you can read that there are three different parts to that.
Can I ask sorry to interrupt, can I ask a point of privilege? I don't see them on email. Have they been emailed to council?
Yes, they have. It was emailed to,
I don't have them.
It says to council meeting amendments on my, you've
Yeah.
got them?
Okay, sorry, if they can be forwarded to me, that'd be great. I don't have them. Thank you.
Could you, thank you. Great. The first one has to do with a report back from staff around a potential amendment to the tenant relocation protection policy to reassess the eligibility in the event that no development permit application has been submitted after a specific period of time. So that would be a report back. And further that, council directs staff to regularly and proactively report back quarterly on Broadway plan area tenancies, inclusive of TRPP eligibility and TRPP ineligible, and housing typologies that may be impacted at a time of a rezoning application, including the availability of suitable replacement units in the city of Vancouver. And further that, council directs staff to investigate and report back to council on recommendations regarding the tenant protections provided by the city of Burnaby. This arose out of listening to one of the speakers and doing some research over the last day that said Burnaby did have some really good tenant protections, and this is one that we don't have that they do, which is the secure securing of tenant protections through a bond that is provided by a developer. So in the case that the developer leaves the project and the tenants have been removed and there's no developer there to provide for the protection around rent, for example, and the finding of suitable accommodation, that in the case of Burnaby, they use the bond that has been provided by the developer to then top up rents to make sure that tenants are protected to the rents that they had originally been told that they would get. So those are the three clauses to do with the first, and those, as I say, related to TRPP. Do we want, we'll do one at a
Councillor Carter, you want to
time?
move that to we need a second to remove that to an amendment queue as, I'm happy to second that. We can move to an amendment
Thank you.
queue.
Oh,
That's right, yeah, sorry. It wasn't seconded, so. Okay, Councillor Meisner to the amendment.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I had a question through you to staff, if I may, around the second, I guess it would be Clause H. There's a request around social housing on high streets in the village areas. It states, until such a time that financial modeling can demonstrate the impacts of new tower form speculation and assessments on local small business viability. I'm just wondering what sort of modeling and assessment has been done already.
Thank you, Councillor. Matt Shillito, Director of the Special Projects Office in Planning. We did undertake extensive economic testing at the time of the plan being prepared. So really, that's going back about 3 years now, of sort of similar commercially zoned areas as the villages in the plan to identify what kinds of additional heights and densities might be viable for new development. We have not done any more specific testing in the Broadway plan area since then.
Okay, so that testing was done, you're saying, but it was 3 years ago, is that right?
That's correct.
In your opinion, have things changed substantially that would warrant new testing? Or is new testing already planned?
We haven't planned new testing. I don't think things have changed substantially, but generally in a negative direction, particularly in relation to interest rates and construction costs, which are obviously related. So I think, without doing the testing, we can't be certain what the differences would be, but generally speaking, the economic conditions have been more challenging over the last 2 or 3 years than they were leading up to that period.
Okay, so as a result of those economic conditions, it'd be actually less viable to construct, say, rental housing in those village areas than it was 3 years ago? Is that what you're saying?
I think that's a reasonable assumption subject to testing.
Okay, great. Thank you. That's it for me.
Great. Councillor Klassen.
Thank you, Chair. Through you, Chair, to staff, I have a question regarding the one under number 1. I'm very curious. First of all, I'm not sure what staff's thoughts are on the. It's very complicated. I actually will be asking for time to recess to review these. But the question I have is, we've just undertaken a fairly lengthy process of updating the TRPP. This one seems to be talking about having a review on a quarterly basis and having the development permit being pulled if it doesn't achieve a certain date. Is that after somebody has been given notice about this, or is that? I guess maybe I should be asking the mover of the motion to try and explain what she's trying to do with A.
Councillor Klassen, if I may, because in the interest of expediting this evening, because I'm chairing and didn't want to relinquish the chair to somebody else, I did take a role in writing these amendments that Councillor Carr graciously submitted. And I can speak to that one specific piece in section 1.2, just for the context of the submission. Section 1.2A, the tenant relocation protection policy is triggered on a rezoning or on a DP. And the idea here is that in the event that property, say, is assembled and submitted for a rezoning and then shopped around for a new purchaser to actually do the development, that could take years. And is there some scenario in which we would want to insulate renters so that they're not sitting in limbo on a rezoning that may be sitting around for 10 years until there's an actual DP issued? If that helps
Okay,
explain. And then I can certainly pass it on to staff.
Yeah. Okay, and just I'm 2 minutes in here, but what is the rest of it here in terms of the Burnaby example, and what is the further that in part 2 of this one? I think you explained the first part 1.2. Was your answer?
It threw me to Councillor Carr.
Great, thank you. Thanks for that question. So as I already explained regarding the further that, I did speak to people from Burnaby around their protection policy, and what was clear is that there are cases in which a developer proceeds with a project. They've got the development permit. They vacate the tenants. They are protected, but then the developer gives up on the project, literally, and the tenants are kind of in a situation where the developer is reneging or defaulting on the topping up, for example, of rents, which is usually part of it.
Counselor, I'm mindful of my time. I appreciate that. My question through you, Chair, to staff, with the minute and a half that I have here. Do they have some thoughts about how this might throw some of the existing projects going? I respect the good intentions, but how are we expecting these to impact the TRPP, which I finally felt to me like it was getting settled?
Thanks, Councillor. Dan Garrison.
Yes, through the chair, Dan Garrison, Housing Policy and Regulation. So for the first and third elements, I'd say changes to eligibility is a significant change in terms of the TRPP process. And so we would want to go back and look at that in terms of what that meant. Like the TRP is a complex policy, and we developed it trying to balance pretty carefully between viability and complexity of applications and tenant protection. And so we arrived at where we arrived. So the fact that the motion or the proposed amendment would send it back to staff to look at is okay. We are proposing, and have outlined in this report, a desire to look at the TRPP process on a more regular basis in terms of updates. So that's probably how we would deal with this, would be to take it away and look at it through that.
That would be the second paragraph in 1. Is that correct? The further that proactively report back. So essentially, we are going to be doing that.
Yeah, we will be doing a report back. We're going to try to get into a system of basically biannual updates to the TRPP, so that we're applying the things we're learning through implementation from other jurisdictions like Burnaby, and regularly updating. So that's how we would probably deal with that if council was to approve these amendments.
Okay, I'm at time. Maybe one of my I do have another question on this one, but I'll let my colleagues go.
Perhaps one of your colleagues will move for a second round. I think the chair's discretion could allow that, but okay. Councillor Montague.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I want to sort of go off of Councillor Klassner's questions. The second part in number 1, the first further that, can you just explain to me how you would interpret that? I've read it a few times, and I'm trying to figure out how staff would interpret that.
Yes, through the chair. So the second piece on a report back on Broadway plan tenancies, we do already do a quarterly report to council on development activity in the Broadway plan. So I think it would be possible to do to include the number of impacted tenancies through that report back. So we would probably take this by adding on of the development happening, how many existing rental units would be impacted, And to the extent that we had that data available by that point in the process, how many eligible tenancies and ineligible tenancies there would be.
So-
That part of it, I think, is doable. The availability of suitable replacement units in the city of Vancouver is more challenging beyond just sort of an assessment of vacancy rate.
Right, and that was one of the things I was just going to say. How do you know what's available? And then I guess you mentioned that you do a quarterly report back on the development that's happening. Do you read it that way though? Like I don't see it as a report back on the development that's happening. I see it more of a report back on the area as a whole.
Right. I mean, that might be a question for the mover. I'm just sort of suggesting how staff would probably respond to the amended motion if council were to approve it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. I might come back on, Chair. That's it for right now.
Thank you, Councillor Kirby-Young.
Yeah, thanks. If I can ask a point of information through you to staff as well, and I'm just looking for clarity. I'm not clear on the first paragraph of number 1. And it might be me, but I just want to be very clear because we heard, for example, last night about, for example, if a building's renovated, tenants asked to leave, they come back, their tenancy of their clock starts again. Then if they decide to redevelop, it doesn't count. This is obviously something different, but I'm just not clear on the reassess eligibility in the event that no DP has been submitted. Eligibility for whom? Can you walk me through this in layman's terms around, you're doing a little explainer?
Sure, yeah. So the way that it works right now under the policy is a rezoning application is submitted. Staff work with the applicant to determine all tenants who were in the building 1 year prior to that date, and those tenants are determined to be eligible. I think the challenge that's being raised here, as Councillor Fry laid out, is sort of what happens is subsequent to that, the project is stalled or delayed. Several tenants have moved out, new tenants move in, those tenants are now not eligible. And if that project sits for maybe 4 or 5 or 6 years,
Okay.
what happens at that point? Should we be thinking about at some point reassessing eligibility for
Got it.
compensation and tenant assistance?
Okay, got it. And then you would have to follow up if I might, Chair, so then you would have to really think through and coming back to council around what an appropriate timeline was and what that looked like, because there would be a lot of intersecting factors, like how long we take to process an application, what else is going on with a particular site that might have unique constraints, all sorts of things, right?
Yes, and there's probably things we can't think of yet that are implications of this, right? So I think if we were to take this away, we would have to do some work and bring back an amendment to the TRPP to council. But first, we would want to consult with industry and with tenant organizations to make sure that we're still getting that balance right.
Okay. Do you think it would be a lot of work to do that?
I think it would be some work. I think it depends on the timing that the work would be expected. We're already looking at doing a sort of regular report back in 2026. So if we could build it into that, I think it would be doable. If it was an additional
But it looks
item,
like the way
it
this
would
is
take
written, there's no
longer.
timeline specified, so you could
That's probably how we would handle it, yes.
build it into that. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Kirby-Young. I'll just add myself to the queue just to make a couple of comments on this because I am trying to expedite this process by, do I need to relinquish the chair? I'm not moving this. I'm just commenting on it. Okay, sure. Who do I relinquish the chair to?
You can relinquish it to me if you'd like.
Councillor Klassen, could I pass the chair to you, please?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks. I just want to reflect on a few of these. Just in a general sense, obviously the Broadway plan with the significant new pieces that have been introduced by the province, this is a fast-moving change to our city, and I think these Broadway plan amendments are responding to significant provincial legislation that has changed some of those parameters, and I think it's incumbent upon us to be responsive to some of that. So. Some of my concerns that are articulated in some of these motions are, very specific to tenant protections. And I think we heard loud and clear that there is a lot of anxiety around tenant protections and what that looks like in the Broadway corridor. We are talking about a significant amount of vulnerable affordable rentals. And so it's important for us to be very on top of that, I think, because first and foremost, our responsibility is to the residents of Vancouver, all the residents of Vancouver. And in the second clause, just to highlight that the changes to the transit-oriented area could potentially impact the villages as we know them and some of our most beloved high streets. And there is no TRPP for commercial tenants. And we know that even though some of the financial testing so far has revealed that the math doesn't necessarily work to incentivize massive speculation on high street in the villages and the TOA areas, we also have seen a pretty significant and I would say probably unprecedented amount of interest in development throughout the Broadway plan area, regardless. So I think it's also incumbent upon us and prudent for us to look at how some of these changes may further impact some of our most beloved high streets, areas like Mount Pleasant, areas like South Granville, areas like the Cambie Village, and just make sure that we're alive to some of those threats to local small business and what the viability of those businesses means if they see tremendous land assessment increases and increases in speculation. So hopeful that council sees the logic in those particular concerns and votes accordingly. Thank you. And Councillor Klassen, I'll take the chair back and advance Councillor Carr on the queue.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I just want to reassure council that it's working well in Burnaby. The last further that clause here, in talking to councillors in Burnaby, said that it has helped in some cases, and there aren't a huge number of cases, but in cases where tenants are basically left high and dry because a developer has abandoned the project and isn't there to provide the rent top-ups. They've left their places and now they can't afford the rents. That bond really makes a difference for those people. So it does, as I say, it does work well. And I believe staff has said here that they are willing to investigate that, and it is a report back to you.
Councillor Carr, Councillor Montague.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I guess, am I allowed to make comments rather than, I guess, just comments instead of questions through stuff? Yeah, okay, so, sorry, it was a long night last night. I'm reading this for about the 5th time now, just trying to figure out what it's trying to accomplish. And I hear the chair talk about what sounds like TRPP for business. And I see in the wording, it talks about reporting back on TRPP ineligible properties. These are really, we heard Dan Garrison talk about how would be a significant change to a very complex and well thought out policy regarding tenant relocation. I think this would be a significant amount of work. And like I said, it appears as though it's asking for a report back on not just the development that's happening, but the entirety of the Broadway plan, which to report back quarterly on the entirety of the area, all 500 blocks. I honestly don't know how staff would even start doing that work. I think the TRPP is I worry about in 15 minutes of back and forth debate here that we're going to tinker with a TRPP policy that's been, like I said, very well thought out, has taken expertise of city staff years to figure out, and they're still in the middle of molding it and tinkering it with them themselves. I don't see how we as council in a few minutes can make potentially some significant changes that could completely grind things to a halt or throw a real wrench into a well thought out policy. So there are little bits in here, little bits and pieces that I understand where where the mover of the amendment is coming from. But I don't want to start severing out little bits and pieces. I'm going to vote the whole thing down. I get where this is trying to go, but it terrifies me to tinker with this, with something that's been in the works for years. And the city staff have been really monitoring over a long period of time to try and get it just right so that it works for as many people as possible. So I'm going to oppose it. And like I said, I understand the rationale for it, but I just don't think it's going to work. Thanks.
Great. Councillor Kirby-Young.
Yeah, can I ask one quick follow-up point of information through you, Chair, if I can, to staff? And it's on number 1 on the second clause, and it's just on the quarterly reporting. So normally on policy plans, we sort of tend to get annual updates, for example. It's been 2 years since we implemented the Broadway plan roughly, and now we're looking at tweaking it based on what's happening. So I'm just wondering what you think the ideal, and I'm thinking about the timelines for our rezonings, right? How quickly we get the process. I'm just wondering what you think the ideal timeline on that would be. Would it be annually? Like, would we see anything materially differently quarterly and versus 6 months, for example?
Yeah, thank you through the chair, Dan Garrison, Housing Policy. I think staff actually already do a quarterly report on Broadway development activity. And so that's where we think, it wouldn't be overly onerous to add the information or data that we have related to tenants to that quarterly report. So that would, I think, be how we would respond if this motion were to pass.
Okay, and then you would just be extracting that report from the rezoning applications where it's already listed, right?
Yeah, essentially, and the tenant relocation work that's going along with them.
Because that's a section in every rezoning application that we get now anyway.
That's right, yeah.
Okay, great, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Meisner.
Yeah, thanks. If I just may ask another question through you to staff. There was a mention about TRPP for business or businesses. Are staff interpreting these amendments in that fashion? I'm not seeing it in there, but I just want clarity around that before voting.
No, Councillor. The staff are interpreting this motion, number 1, to be purely in relation to the residential TRPP.
Okay, so nothing around businesses.
No.
And then I was also just a question, if I may. This is obviously a lot of information coming at the last minute. Our staff, I just want to get a sense of what's on the screen here. Are you already doing a lot of this? I keep hearing we're doing quarterly reporting, we're doing all these things. Are these things that are already happening?
Well, as Dan Garrison mentioned, we do already report quarterly on development activity, so the progress of development applications and inquiries. We don't currently report on TRPP matters, so this would be new.
Because we're reporting biannually right now?
That's
on TRPP?
Is that right, Dan? Sorry. We're looking into adding a biannual report on the TRPP.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Right now, is it yearly, or what is the reporting frequency?
Yeah, currently part of our annual progress report.
Okay, great. Thank you. That's it for me. I'm going to need to sever these for sure.
Sure. Councillor Klassen, if you could take the mic for a sec.
Yep, happy to.
Thanks. I just wanted to add a little clarity to Councillor Montague's comments. I was making an off comparison that there is no TRPP for business. I'm not suggesting this is a TRPP for business. What I was trying to suggest is that small businesses don't have a lot of protections, and that in fact, the new TOA legislation is very new in the context of even the Broadway plan. So responding to that, because we had previously isolated villages, they're no longer isolated in the same way. There's a new built form going from 4 to 6 stories to potentially 20 stories. That could have impacts on property assessments. So really it's just looking at how we're protecting our small business communities in some of our most beloved village areas. And I use TRPP as a kind of reference. It may have been confusing, and I apologize for that. And then I think Dan Garrison addressed the notion that this is really part of the quarterly report as far as the TRPP for residences in new clause 1. That's strictly about the actual TRPP and tenancies that might potentially be impacted, and recognizing that this is a fast-moving piece and there's a lot of change going on, and that we don't currently report back on TRPP impacts or placements in the Broadway plan context, except for annually, but certainly not quarterly. And we do a quarterly report back, so it makes sense to add it to our quarterly report back. Really just trying to make sure that we're keeping tabs on the important things that matter in our city. That's it for me. Thanks, Councillor Klassen. Councillor Carr.
Just to close, I just want to remind all of us at the council table that of the over 100 speakers that we listened to, the vast majority talked about the worry around tenants, particularly very vulnerable tenants. People, seniors, people with disabilities, people, who are living in housing that is decent and affordable right now, and the worry about their displacement. So that is why I'm going to encourage you and urge you to vote for these, for this amendment, the 3 clauses.
Thanks, Councillor Carr. Seeing no further questions, I think Councillor Meisner wanted to sever.
If we could sever all of them, paragraphs, please. Thank you.
Okay, so severing all 5. Okay.
Oh,
Yes, please.
5
Vote on each paragraph individually.
in the first one.
I'm sorry, I'm now seeing Councillor Klassen and Meisner on the amendment queue. Is that new? Councillor Klassen, I'm sorry, before we call a vote?
Sorry, point of parliamentary procedure? Yeah, somebody said all 5. There are 3. This is a first motion I'm tabling, and there's only 3 paragraphs in it.
There's 5 paragraphs on the screen.
But that's because there's 2 motions I'm tabling.
I have a point of procedure. It wasn't indicated that they were being moved separately. I thought that they were all moved and seconded as one.
I think they were.
That was not
they were all
distinguished.
submitted together, unfortunately.
That's my understanding as well.
Mhm.
Oh,
Yeah. Councillor Klassen, before we call a vote, are you on the queue?
I am on the queue, but we did have questions, and I was going to just make a comment, but it was, I think, along the lines of just, again, my sort of somewhat confusion here. I understand what we're attempting here, but I do think much of the work is already in play right now. So I don't know, maybe I think if we just sever these out and then I can respond then. I'll just leave it for that and for us to sever these things out.
Okay. And Councillor Carr.
I'm sorry. I did submit them as add a letter for the first 3 paragraphs in number 1, and then add a new letter for the other 2. So I guess it was, my apologies. I'm looking at my screen, not that screen. But I do feel it incumbent upon me, having submitted it, to speak to the last 2 paragraphs. We spent most of the time discussing at this table the first 3 paragraphs, but the last 2, I think what's really important about those is the restriction that new tower height density policies in the village high streets to restrict that for the time being until there is an assessment to 100% social housing only, and to have staff come back with the financial modeling, or to look at financial modeling that can demonstrate the impact of new tower development form speculation and assessment of that on local small business viability. I mean, I think it's really, there's a real worry about the villages and the small business, and let's limit, as I say, to the desperately needed social housing in this city. I don't imagine there'd be a lot of it, but every bit of it is really, really valuable, especially to help out with the people who are being displaced by other development in the Broadway corridor. And that further, that we really need to focus our efforts on the federal and the provincial governments to provide the money for that social housing, because the market will not supply affordable housing that's needed. We need the senior governments to do that.
Great. Thanks, Councillor Carr. Okay, seeing no further speakers, we can move to the vote, and we're severing all 5 clauses. So voting on the first clause first, and that's the council direct staff to report back on the suitability, section 1.2A of the tenant relocation. And that passes with Councillor Montague in opposition. Okay, thank you. Moving to second clause. Bear with us as we get that up on the screen and highlighted. And that's the report back quarterly on TRPP. Has everybody voted already? Oh, and that passes with Councillor Montague in opposition. Moving on to third clause of new clause 1, highlighted on your screen. That's the City of Burnaby reference. Is that everybody in? Okay, and that passes with Councillor Montague in opposition. Okay, thanks, folks. Moving on to new clause 2.1. I am adding numbers to this. Okay, second phrase, or first phrase of new clause 2, around TOAs and development pressures. Pulling up the vote. And that is, oh, no, that fails with Councillor Kirby-Young, Councillor Montague, Councillor Klassen, Councillor Meisner, and Mayor Sim in opposition. In the last clause, second phrase of clause 2, coming up on your screen with the highlight. And that's the mayor writing a letter to the provincial and federal governments requesting specific and targeted investment for new social housing in transit-oriented areas. And that passes with Councillor Montague and Mayor Sim in opposition. Okay. Thank you, folks. Back on the main queue. Councillor Carr.
Oh, sorry, I'll just take myself off for a moment.
Sure. Councillor Kirby-Young.
I'm fine for now.
Okay. You're talking right now, aren't you? Okay. Sorry, yeah, we'll reset your clock. Councillor Meisner.
Just confirm these are closing comments before the.
Looks that way, yes.
Yeah, great, thank you. Thanks to all the speakers who stayed late yesterday, came in person and called in to share your views on this important plan, which really capitalizes on the $3 billion investment in the Broadway subway, scheduled to open in 2027. I firmly believe that these updates and the Broadway plan in general is the right thing to do to create more desperately needed housing here in our city, in particular rental and below market housing. I do understand the concern in the community around the plan overall. And I'm sure that seeing many blue rezoning signs pop up in neighborhoods is quite startling. But I want residents to know that I've learned that many developers are simply putting their applications in now at the beginning of the plan to, quote, secure their spot for future redevelopment. This does not mean that all this development is going to happen at the same time. It will happen gradually over the next 30 years. And in the future, a decade from now, when these neighborhoods are full of families as they are now, but home to even more people, living in new, modern, climate resilient, sustainable buildings, enjoying new park spaces, slow streets, retail spaces, amenities, all connected by a modern subway system that allows people to travel all over the Lower Mainland without a car. I strongly believe that Vancouverites will look back on these decisions on the Broadway plan and say that was the right decision at the time for the future of our city. And I really liken it to the visionary thinking that created the West End decades ago that has resulted in a beautiful, dynamic, and desirable neighborhood that it is today. I say all this reassured, knowing that we have the strongest tenant protections in Canada baked into this plan, and people will be protected. These new developments won't just increase the overall number of rental homes, they'll also increase the overall number of below-market homes. So looking at some analysis of the first 30 residential and mixed-use applications submitted under the Broadway plan, it's not true that affordability will be worsened by this new development. In fact, affordability will be enhanced. These first projects will deliver a massive increase in the total number of rental suites, providing a net gain of 5,800 secured rental units over what we have now. And while half of these projects do involve sites that currently have rental buildings, the policy requires that the 558 units that are within those applications will be replaced by twice as many units, over 1,100 brand new below market rental units with below market rents in perpetuity. So that's a doubling of below market units, which will be brand new units, modern with things like air conditioning, et cetera, modern finishes, not buildings. Some of these buildings are in very poor condition. And people will be able to move back into those units. And in the meantime, they will be taken care of. And I have empathy that it is difficult to move and there will be disruption in their life, but for a couple of years, but we are going to do everything we can to take care of those people with our policies, with our staff working hard. And it will be worth it. It will be worth it. This is really the right call for the future of our city. We're asked here to think about, make decisions for the future of our city. And sometimes those aren't easy decisions. Sometimes they're difficult decisions, not just for everybody, but for the people who live in our city. But this is going to really help us address the housing crisis in a meaningful way. This is a responsible thing to do in locations adjacent to rapid transit, amenities, shops, services. And again, I strongly believe that in the future, we're going to look back and say, we made the right call for Vancouver, and we're a better city because of it. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Meisner. Councillor Carr.
Thank you. Thank you, staff, for the work that you put into this. There are things that I really like and appreciate in this particular iteration of the Broadway plan. I'm really appreciative of the incorporation of direction that came from just immense public involvement in the Vancouver plan and the Broadway plan around the public realm. So all of the details that you've got in, and I know that Steph has been saying to me every time I bring this up, well, just wait till you see what is coming up in the Broadway plan in terms of reallocating 11% of the streets for public use, and making sure that there are mini parks and places where people of all ages and abilities can enjoy themselves. So that is great to see a de-emphasizing of cars on some of those, on many of, well, all those streets that we talked about, the 11%, but also even on Broadway and creating that high street, looking at the incorporation of First Nations art into the landscape. All of this on the trees, the protection of trees and growing the canopy, all of that I am incredibly appreciative of and support, which is why I absolutely will support recommendation E and the civic district, and also the civic district policies, which is in D, City Hall itself. I think the retention of a public plaza, it'll be a relocation of one, but having a public plaza where people can gather, retention of the special trees. I asked that question, the answer was yes. And the garden, the community garden in the civic area is really important to me, and I think to a lot of people. So I can absolutely support that. Where I am struggling is with B and C, and the reason I'm struggling is the changes that have been made take away from the achievements I think we made in the first passing of this Broadway plan. And in particular, I'm very concerned about the number of towers, the height, the density on those. But we landed in a place in the first iteration of this plan I felt comfortable with, because it very much reflected what we have in the West End. 2 towers, tower in a park, recessed from the street, with greenery and a lot of elements that don't make you feel that you are in a jungle of towers. The changes that are incorporated into this plan change that. The movement forward of towers, moving from 2 to 3 towers, putting towers into adjacent areas, and I just don't think that we need that. We have a pace of development right now that's really intense in this area. I think we need to move forward with it. So I'm not going to vote for B and C. I feel very worried about how this is going to impact the people in terms of the pace of dislocation of people who are in rental housing that's affordable and of a great size right now. Where are they going to go? Is there enough housing for them even available anywhere near this area? If we had pace of change, which we did to begin with, but lost that in the plan, it would make a big difference. But it's not there, and I really worry about the people who will be dislocated. I really worry about our really precious high streets, the high streets that we love them, and I'm, as I say, happy with the pieces I've mentioned, and I will not, though, be supporting the changes to the density of towers in B and C.
Thanks, Councillor Carr. So you'll be asking for B and C to be
To
severed.
be severed, please. Yes.
Okay. Councillor Klassen.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, staff, for this plan. And I really, like others, would like to acknowledge all of the speakers who came and made their voices heard online through submission of letters and coming to the chamber and phoning in both for and against. The fact is that Vancouver, the city of Vancouver, we're really good at building livable cities. And I just look at the example of the West End. It is heralded as one of North America's best urban neighborhoods. And I predict neighborhoods within the boundaries of the Broadway plan will become just as successful. Beautiful streets of today will be just as captivating as today, if not more in the future. And you're all correct to say that it is the job of mayor and council to represent you and all of the 700,000 residents who live here, and even though those who might someday make Vancouver home. The Broadway plan has 3 important components: a public realm plan that will be a shining example to other cities that will help achieve the goal of making Broadway a great street. The plan also responds to provincial legislation that requires local governments to factor in the transit hubs and corridors to help reduce automobile use and make best use of the multi-billion-dollar rapid transit investments of the Broadway subway line extension and Canada Line, and a civic district that will enhance the services that the City of Vancouver delivers for its citizens and business operators. This plan has been criticized, but I think that the public benefits are significant for neighborhoods within the Broadway plan boundaries and the city as a whole. We can expect far more net new below market rental homes and market rental homes as the development proceeds in the Broadway plan area. The city's tenant relocation protection policy, TRPP, is the balancing force. It requires property owners who want to replace their old buildings to extraordinary compensation and relocation assistance to tenants who have to temporarily relocate to enable construction. I remain fully committed to making sure that the TRPP succeeds and works for residents. We understand that people are concerned about the pace of change, and it's my view that the TRP policy will ultimately regulate the pace of development. In my view, we do not need to pause the plan that is just beginning to generate some positive results. Old buildings with existing tenants can't proceed to construction until the owners have fulfilled their responsibilities under the TRPP, and that's really important to understand. The benefits granted to tenants are extraordinary, and there is special assistance for tenants with special needs. Industry research and feedback from the Goodwin report indicates that there will be more than half of existing tenants will return to brand new homes at less rent than they are currently paying today. And make no mistake, the rental homes that are being created are affordable, and even the market rentals are meeting the need for high quality rental homes that are rents that are far below the cost to purchase and maintain an equivalent condominium. I agree with speakers who shared that we need to ensure new intensity, that new intensity will be supported with new amenity. That's something that as council we're very focused in on. Planning staff have identified strategies to plan for community amenities to support new population growth. School capacity was raised by some speakers, and I believe the school district and the province are duty bound to better respond to the pressures on enrollment. The Broadway plan applications include local shops and services and hundreds of new daycare spaces, redevelopment of community facilities like La Maison, the French Cultural Center, and public open spaces secured through legal agreements with private development. City staff have developed a strategy to further improve and expand upon existing facilities, parks, and open spaces through public and private investment to keep up with the demands of growth. It makes sense to allow higher intensity residential development off arterial streets. Some of the most lovely high-rise homes in Vancouver are located off arterials in the West End, downtown South, and even in Kitts. Vancouver planners, architects, and builders are applying the Vancouverism design principle, and new neighborhoods will create intensity with residential buildings with quiet, leafy streets, lower podiums, doors, patios, and eyes on the street. This plan will enhance communities, provide more shopping and services, be walkable and served by rapid transit as our demographic ages, and young people and families will make their roots in these incredible neighborhoods bounded within the Broadway plan. Thank you very much, and I will be supporting all the recommendations.
Councillor Klassen, can I just commend you on your impeccable timing? 5 minutes exactly. Councillor Kirby-Young.
All right, well, that might be hard to top. Thanks to staff for all the work on this one. Policies are evolving, and so it is good to revisit them. But there's an intersection here that I think is important to remember, is that we have an imperative from the province to align with the TOAs. So in terms of looking at B and C, if we, for example, did not support that as a council, I'm sure that we would have some pretty vibrant conversations with the province, because we do have an obligation to do that. So I just want to provide that context around this piece. What I think the city can do is be thoughtful about putting some of the other enabling and supportive policies around the public realm piece and livability, around delineating some of the village areas, and really being a bit thoughtful about the nature of the tenure and things that are not required in the TOAs. It's more of a blunt instrument from the province around, in my understanding, around delivering the housing. But I think the city's opportunity is to shape it to deliver the type of housing that we want. It was really compelling to look at 20,000 units or in the pipeline. But again, pipeline does not necessarily mean that those are coming to fruition. So all those projects, 29 were actually approved. That's 29 projects across 500 blocks. And I know that change is challenging for people, but it will also take years to build those out, and they are fairly dispersed when you look at them. I also think it's important to recognize that it's pretty compelling when you have a less than 1% vacancy rate and in the city of Vancouver for rental, and people are desperately lining up trying to find a place that 15,000 units in pipeline is not insignificant, and 20% of those units are or more than 3,300 are below market. I know people say they're not affordable enough, but it sure is better than if you don't build any of them. And building today's units become the affordable housing of tomorrow. So those affordable buildings that people are living in now, they weren't as affordable when they were built. They become that affordable over time, and a number of them are aging. But I will say that it's each situation has a very real and a very human impact, and we heard from a lot of people who, understandably, are worried about their circumstances, and that is why we put the TRPP in place, and it is the strongest set of renter protections broadly on the continent. And so I think that is a signal of the commitment there. I appreciated the amendment from Councillor Carr, because I was actually contemplating bringing something forward myself similar around tracking not just the amount of new housing we're delivering, but how many net units are we gaining versus in terms of building the affordability versus that we are losing. And in buildings that inevitably are going to have to be replaced in the coming 10 to 15 years anyway, because they become too expensive for owners to maintain them as the maintenance increases. And so I think that taking that sort of human lens on it, but looking at the bigger picture, this is really about delivering the housing that's needed for the city. It's and building the complete communities. The public realm piece is something that I am focused on and will continue to remain focused on looking at being as creative as we can in funding that, recognizing that, again, within some of the provincial mandates, there's going to be a lot of changes around that piece, but the benefit strategy is a critically important one to ensure livability. And I know when we had that first conversation in July 2022, I think it was when we passed the plan, this is about the time when we knew that we'd be starting to really put some meat on the bones in terms of what that piece looks like. So I'm going to stay very focused on that. What I was happy to see as well was 1,300 hotel units in the pipeline and an intention to increase the target to 3,000. That is good news in terms of the economy in our city and employment. And the more hotel rooms we have, it takes pressure off housing where people are tempted sometimes to illegally Airbnb or rent it out because the housing should be for locals. But that pressure happens if we don't have enough hotel rooms. So I think on balance, this is a thoughtful approach around looking to meet, and I'm going to be very clear on this, our legal obligation to the province to comply with the TOAs, to do it in a way that delivers the tenure of housing that we want in the city, keeping the door open on some large sites and other projects that could generate some cash contributions coming forward to fund some of those amenities, and looking at continuing to support tenants when we get those regular reports back that staff have scheduled, and they can address some of those questions as part of the overall consideration and ongoing tweaks and amendments. So I will be supporting this as amended, and I appreciate all the work. Thank you. And I appreciate all the speakers that let us know what their personal experience is so that we can do our best to ensure our policies address that, as well as making room for people that need additional housing. Thank you.
Well, you're no Klassen, but that was also very well timed, a little bit over. Councillor Montague.
Just sever G&H, please.
That's it? Okay. Mayor Sim.
Great, thank you very much. First of all, I do want to thank Matt, Josh, the entire team for all the incredible work you've done on this. Not an easy lift, working with the mayor's office and then just everyone. Absolutely amazing. So thank you very much. Really appreciative. For all the speakers that came in, thank you. Thank you for sharing with us your concerns. They're not lost. We can talk about what's good for the city, what's good for the whole. We talk about what's good, if something makes sense for the city over the next 30 years, we'll do it. But I want to talk about the human aspect of this, first of all. And I know, having sat around this chamber, I know everyone feels the same way with what I'm going to explain next. And I'm going to go into a bit of a personal story just so people understand the feeling. As a lot of people know, my family struggled when they came to Canada, and I went to 5 elementary schools in 7 years because our family was one of the very many families in Vancouver who couldn't make rent. And so we lived all over the city, and it was challenging. And so, frankly, my parents, they could talk about building a city, but they didn't care. I remember my mom, coming up, waking up as a little kid and seeing her cry at the kitchen table. And I didn't fully understand what that meant at the time, but as I got older, I realized, through my sisters, that she was devastated because she didn't know where the family was going to live. And she was the primary breadwinner, raised a family of 5 kids on a secretary's salary, a typist at BC Packers. And it's scary, and it's stressful, and you can't even think. And we get that. And as in our role in this council, we have a responsibility to make sure that we're taking in all this information and we are serving the broadest group of constituents in the city of Vancouver over the next 30 years. But that doesn't mean that we don't understand how scary and stressful the situation is. And that doesn't mean that we're going to drive towards that goal without making sure we take care of our people, acknowledge how they feel, or how we can empathize with how they feel. And you've heard Councillor Meisner and Councillor Kirby-Young mention that we do have the strongest tenant protections in the continent. I know this is not going to be easy for some individuals, but we can do it in a way where we take care of people, because at the end of the day, we do have to look at what's in the best interests of everyone. And there are a lot of individuals that are currently in a situation where they don't even have the ability to be in that spot of worry because they can't live in the city of Vancouver. And so I will be supporting this. I know it's been very well done with a lot of thought and care, and we do have the best tenant protections in the continent. And I do fully acknowledge that it is a scary time for the people that are affected. And for that, I know talking about what's good for the city over the next 30 years is going to resonate probably as much as it did with my parents as well. And I'm sorry for that. But what we can do is we can act in a way that this council does the best they can to take care of the tenants that are, that have to go through this transition. Thank you.
Thanks, Mayor. Councillor Klassen, can you take the chair? I can make a comment.
You bet.
Thank you. Yeah, so really want to thank all the speakers. It takes a lot of courage to come here, and really I think there is a great deal of anxiety, and I think the mayor did a good job of articulating the real stress, and I think all the speakers, of course, really reflected on the fact that these are people's homes, and it's a very tough market out there, and this is stressful. I do take a great deal of have a great deal of confidence in our policies that will protect those tenancies and find the relocations, and I do think that with some of the amendments we've added, and that we are aligned to really put that first and foremost, because really at the end of the day, our job is about the people who live and work in our city, and that's my commitment and my fundamental priority. So it's but it is a very weighty decision, and I also want to thank staff. And I just want to name too that, having been on this council in the last term, and knowing that the Broadway plan was worked on even before I got onto council in the last term, and then it was delayed over COVID. And I mean, it must feel like a scene out of Bill Murray's Groundhog Day for some of you, because then the TOA comes along and the province introduces new things and you got to relitigate Broadway. I mean, it's complicated, and I realize it's been a lot of heavy lifting for staff, and I really want to commend that as well. I do really, I'm grateful that council supported the amendments that was put forward by Councillor Carr, but disappointed that the one piece, and I think this is where we are missing, is the protection for the villages. I am confident that we're protecting tenancies for renters and that we're going to be taking care of people, but I worry that our small businesses aren't getting that same protection. I selfishly think about some of my favorite areas around Mount Pleasant, the Triangle, Gene Coffee, Cascade Room, all around there. And I worry that, I know the rationale has suggested that the financial modeling won't increase speculation and pressures on those businesses, but I'm very uncertain, and I know that it's tough times for our small businesses in the city and across Canada, of course. But we've seen that 20% below market towers are popping up in rezonings. I mean, we did 5 of them in the last 2 weeks. So it's not that there is not a market and appetite for investment in towers, rental towers with 20% below market. And I do worry that without more advanced protections for some of those villages areas that are smack dab in the middle of the TOA, like South Granville, like Mount Pleasant, that we could see some disastrous impacts. And that's the piece that I struggle with, and I struggle with specifically clauses B and C as a result of that, because I think the majority is very thoughtful and considerate, but I worry that we're not protecting those villages, those high streets that really make our city. And I look to, I think somebody mentioned Davie Street, look to Commercial Drive. None of them have those same TOA pressures that we see in these particular villages in the Broadway plan area, and that's what's got me struggling. But on the whole, I would say very excellent work from staff. A lot of thought and consideration went into this, and I'm glad that the concerns of many residents and the future housing for many residents has been considered and articulated in this plan. But I do struggle with the village areas, and will inform my decision on B and C. So with that, clerks, if we can move to the vote. I think there's been a request to sever B, C, and G and H. Does that sound about right? Okay, so council, we're putting on B and C. And that passes with me abstaining, Councillor Carr in opposition. We have it up for G and H. Okay, and so council, now we're voting on G and H. And that passes with Councillor Montague in opposition. And I guess we're voting on everything else. Okay, and now we're voting on everything else. Councillor Kirby-Young? That passes with none in opposition. Okay, folks, thank you. Thank you, clerks. That completes the Broadway Plan Review and Implementation Report. The standing committee portion of this meeting is now complete. We will now convene in council with Mayor Sim as chair to deal with the recommendations and actions from today's committee meeting.
Great, thank you very much. So we will now reconvene in council to deal with the following recommendations and actions from today's standing committee on city finance and services meeting and urgent business. Clerk, can we please have a roll call?
Mayor Sim is in the chair. Councillor Carr. Councillor Kirby-Young. Councillor Dominato is on a medical leave. Councillor Bly is on a leave of absence for personal reasons. Councillor Boyle is on a leave of absence for personal reasons. Councillor Fry.
Present?
Councillor Montague. Councillor Klassen.
Present.
Councillor Meisner. And Councillor Joe is on a leave of absence for personal reasons. You have quorum, Mayor Sim.
Great, thank you. A reminder that at yesterday's meeting, we had adopted standing committee recommendations for reports 2 through 5 and for members' motions 1 through 4. For this evening, we need a motion to adopt the standing committee's recommendations for report 1. Councillor Kirby-Young, seconded by Councillor Meisner. All those in favor say yay. All those
Yay.
opposed say nay. Great, the motion carries unanimously. Urgent business. Council, are there any items of urgent business? For instance, are there any leaves of absent requests needed prior to the next meeting cycle on January the 21st? A reminder that these requests should be submitted in writing to the clerks through the amendments distribution list. Let's go here. Do I need to see the chair? I have one.
Sure.
Great.
Yep. Go
Thank
ahead.
you very much. I will be asking for a leave of absence request on January the 21st from 5 p.m. onwards for civic business.
Okay. Moved and seconded by Councillor Kirby-Young. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Seeing none? That passes. Back to you, Mayor.
Thank you very much. Seeing no one else on the queue, council, may we have a mover to adjourn?
Move.
Great.
Second.
Councillor Kirby-Young, I think that was Councillor Klassen. Seconded. Is there any discussion? All those in favor say yay. All those
Yay.
opposed say nay. Great. The motion carries unanimously. Thank you, everyone.